This is a video tutorial for Phil 123, Module 10, on the Chinese room. Now, the Chinese room stuff should be read after you've read Turing and the Turing test stuff, so make sure you get this thing in the right order. One of the things that we know about Turing is that Turing is a kind of a behaviorist. He endorses methodological behaviorism in particular, and Turing's reason for thinking that a computer can think is, well, the only evidence that we've got is the exact same evidence that I have that you're thinking. Namely, that you perform the right behaviors in the right circumstances. So, if you're producing the right kind of behavior, given the right kind of inputs, for example, I smash your hand with a hammer, that's an input, and you produce the right kind of behavioral output, you scream, you wince, you grab at the side of pain, you get very resentful towards me, as well you should, then that's evidence that you're thinking. Right behavior, given the right circumstances. But again, a computer, or at least the right kind of computer, is capable of doing that as well. Of course, not just every computer is going to pass the Turing test. A calculator or a digital watch is a kind of a computer. Nobody thinks that they're going to pass the Turing test. But some very sophisticated computer programs, combined with the right hardware, might be able to do it. Now, what John Searle suggests, and this is what the Chinese room stuff is supposed to show, is that it's not just a question of whether we've got sophisticated enough computers to pass the Turing test. If Searle's right, no computer could pass the Turing test. At the very least, sorry, I should get this right. Even if a computer does pass the Turing test, it's not capable of being conscious. It's not capable of thinking. It might be imitating, it might be simulating thinking, but if Searle's right, a computer is not really thinking, no way. Again, early on in his paper, Searle distinguishes between what he calls strong AI and weak AI. Everybody endorses weak AI. Weak AI simply asserts that a computer is a very powerful tool for understanding the mind. I think that, Searle thinks that, you think that, your 87-year-old grandmother thinks that, everyone thinks that. Strong AI is the controversial thesis. Again, strong AI asserts not only that a computer resembles a mind or is useful for understanding minds, strong AI holds that a computer is a mind, that it is thinking. Turing seems to endorse strong AI. So does Lycan from the readings. Searle does not. Searle absolutely does not. Searle rejects strong AI. That should be pretty clear from the readings. Now, what is Searle's argument that even the most sophisticated kind of computer could never really be said to be thinking, that it could never really be said to be conscious? Moving computer a bit. Yeah. This is what the Chinese room argument is supposed to show. So there's a really nice video. It's a bit dated, but it's clear enough that's going to help illustrate what's going on in the Chinese room. What we're supposed to imagine is that there's something like a very large box, and there's a place where you can write messages down, or you could type something in. It doesn't really matter. You could ask, if you will, the Chinese room. You can ask this thing any question you want. And what we'll see is that it reliably produces the right answers. So if you ask it, what's the weather like? It'll give you time and temperature and tell you what the weather's going on. Is it raining? Is it sunny? If you ask what was the #1 movie at the box office this week, it'll be able to give you a list of movies. If you ask it to tell a joke, right, it'll produce the right kind of behavioral output. I have no idea what that joke would be. 3 men walked into a bar, the 4th one ducked. I didn't say it was a good joke. In any case, what we will consistently see in the Chinese room, with the Chinese room, is that given the right inputs, given namely the questions you ask it, it consistently produces the right kind of outputs. It answers the questions correctly. Maybe its jokes aren't hilarious, maybe it gets some of the facts wrong, but it is clearly attempting to answer your questions, or at least it seems to be. Because what's going on in the inside of the Chinese room? What we're supposed to imagine is that there's some guy in there. Perhaps Searle himself is inside. It's also, the most important part of the Chinese room. All the questions and answers are written in Chinese. Okay, a native Chinese speaker would be able to read, Mandarin I suppose, would be able to read these things and understand what was being written, understand what was being said. Inside the Chinese room, however, is John Searle. Let's imagine. And importantly, Searle does not speak a word of Chinese. He does not know what any Chinese characters mean, so he can't read it either. But what he does have are a couple of very large books. On one book is a list of all the possible combinations of symbols, all the possible Chinese characters that he might come across. In that first book, there's instructions that say if you see this symbol, turn to page, I don't know, 2047 in the second book. He opens up that book, which contains some different symbols, and instructs him to write those symbols down. Okay? So what's happening is that Searle finds these symbols, looks them up in the one book, follows the directions, and writes some other symbols down, and then feeds it back out. Unbeknownst to him, because again, Searle doesn't speak a word of Chinese, he doesn't read a single symbol. What Searle is doing is producing the right kind of behavioral outputs given the appropriate kind of inputs. Does that mean that Searle understands Chinese? Does that mean he's thinking about Chinese? Well, it seems pretty clearly not. Searle thinks that all he's doing is manipulating symbols. He's not interpreting them. He's not understanding them. He's simply manipulating them. But, says Searle, thinking requires more than just the manipulation of symbols. It requires understanding. To put it another way, thinking requires not just syntax, say the formal rules of grammar, but it requires semantics as well. It requires that you know what those particular symbols mean. So if Searle's right, the Turing test shouldn't even get off the ground, because notice, the Chinese room is passing the Turing test. It reliably, consistently produces the right behavioral outputs in the right circumstances. You could be forgiven for thinking that the Chinese room, or maybe the guy inside the Chinese room, it might matter, is actually thinking and that it actually understands Chinese. But Searle himself understands not a word of it. Now, not surprisingly, there's a huge literature here, and I'm more than happy to let you sort things out for yourself. It is worth wondering, though, if Searle's analogy works all that well. If Searle himself is inside the Chinese box, it's not clear that that's really an analogous of a computer. That would be analogous to a computer processor, but it would lack anything like software, it would lack anything like a memory bank, it would lack all kinds of things that a computer has. Maybe it's not Searle inside the Chinese room that understands Chinese. Maybe the whole room, Searle plus all that other stuff, could be said to be understanding Chinese. It's worth wondering about. Not surprisingly, Searle doesn't think that reply works. Maybe you do. So, Searle is pretty clearly rejecting even a thesis like methodological behaviorism here. But importantly, Searle is not himself a dualist. Okay, he's not a substance dualist like Descartes. He's not a property dualist like Jackson. He's something else altogether. In fact, if you asked Searle the question, can a machine think, he would say, yes. You're a machine, says Searle. You're not made out of metal and silicon like a computer is. You're made out of meat, as it were. Kind of gross, but it's his terminology. Searle remains a kind of physicalist, but a funny kind of physicalist. If Searle's right, no, a computer can't think. The only kind of thing that could think is the sort of thing that has a brain like you have. A thinking meat machine. So, Searle remains a kind of physicalist. He's not a dualist, but he's certainly not a behaviorist either.